So if I turn to the agenda for today, I welcome everybody. We've had one apology, that's from Jackie Bland, and I also need to tell you that this is being recorded and will be posted on the website. Moving on to item 3 then, announcements. I think the main thing here that we need to catch up on is where we are vis-a-vis COVID. In fact, COVID-19 is overshadowing everything that we do today, and that's going to be through our lives for quite a bit yet. But of course, we had the announcements by the Prime Minister on Sunday, and that's been followed up now by 50 pages of regulation, which I haven't yet read. So I think it'd be helpful if the Chief Constable in a second could bring us up to date a little bit with that. I'm bound to say that so far, all the reaction that I'm getting in from emails and telephone calls and the like indicate that so far, I think the general opinion amongst the public is that the police are getting the balance of this about right. We do get emails from people on the one hand who say you're too heavy-handed. On the other hand, we have people, perhaps more of them actually, saying, why don't you do something about the party down our road or the people gathering in our park? So insofar as I can tell, it seems to me that the balance is about right because we're not being overwhelmed by reaction from the public in either of those directions. But of course the situation is fluid and it's moving on. And on Sunday it began to move on again with the Prime Minister's announcement, and now how that is understood by the police. So I think, Chief, if you could just say something around that as to what instructions are now being given to the police and how you see things developing.
Yes, thank you. I think, of course, the new dispensation comes into effect tomorrow as per the Prime Minister's announcement. I think for the most part, the changes, whilst they will be notable in terms of the numbers of people out and about and what have you, don't actually make too much difference to our adopted policing style. Again, I think it's really important to emphasise that the vast majority of the public are being very sensible, very cooperative, are taking personal responsibility and making sensible decisions for themselves and their families in the interests of the wider community and the NHS.
Please hold.
That is very much appreciated. Our levels of enforcement, and again, just to re-emphasize the fact that our approach is to engage with people, to educate people, to encourage people, and only to move to enforcement where it's absolutely necessary and where the behaviours are simply egregious or people simply won't take no for an answer and their conduct is particularly selfish and is putting others' lives at risk. In those circumstances, we will move to enforcement. But I have to say, and bear in mind we have a population of 1.4 million people, since this began in totality, total fixed penalty notices so far around about 390, which is a relatively small figure considering the resident population. So again, I'm very grateful to the public for their cooperation, and I think people are understandably getting to the point where we all wish that this were over, but people recognise that it's not over until we can collectively get upstream of this dreadful virus and move on with our lives. So in that respect, we're in a good place. In terms of the difference, I think, between where we have been and where we are going, substantially, of course, notwithstanding some of the public discourse about clarity or otherwise, I actually think that the position from our perspective is very clear. I think people are still being encouraged, for the most part, to stay at home. If they can go to work, people who cannot work from home are being encouraged, of course, increasingly to return to work. But I think in terms of the policing context, the most significant change is that Her Majesty's government are widening the sort of almost permitted use of the outdoors understanding, I think, that people are, increasingly, getting to the point where being cooped up in homes is very difficult for a lot of people, understandably so. And so this idea that people can get out of doors, can do more things that might previously have brought them into conflict with the regulations will not be the case. So, your ability to wander out into parks and to sit and enjoy the sunshine and to have a picnic and all those good things, these are all things which will be permitted. I think the key message from our perspective is to say that whilst there will be more people out and about, it is still important that social distancing is respected and that you only associate with members of your own household. And so, if you like, the potential policing inquiry narrows itself down to a very simple prospectus, and that is, if we encounter large groups of people, we will simply be inquiring as to what the composition of that group is. And if they are members of your household and you are respecting distance between your family group and other family groups, then you're permitted to do whatever you're doing. If, however, you are associating with people who are not in your own household, then you'll be breaching the regulations. So in many respects, it becomes a very simple proposition, and one that we will continue in the spirit of that which we've been doing in the past to enforce. I would just say that in terms of public reaction to the policing style, I echo your own observations, Commissioner. From our perspective, people, for the most part, whatever complaints that we have had have actually been from people who are saying that actually we should do more, that we should enforce more harshly, and what have you. I do think we have the balance about right, but we have no complaints, and I think it's an important point. We have no complaints from the public in terms of where we have taken enforcement action. So again, I think that points perhaps to us getting the balance about right. So more of the same in terms of the policing style, slightly different focus, which is basically policing a new dispensation where people are happily permitted more regular use of the outdoors for a wide variety of purposes. All we're asking for is that people continue only to associate with members of their household and to respect social distancing between them and others.
Thank you. So, insofar as one can abbreviate these things, the message seems to be that the police, you'll be asking people, who are you with, rather than where are you going, which was perhaps the emphasis previously.
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on then to public questions. I don't think there are any, unless Sally tells me different.
No, Commissioner.
Thanks. Urgent items, I don't think there are any, except that we're picking up those as we go along. Item 6, nothing that needs to be considered in the absence of the public and the press. Item 7, declarations of interest, unless someone has something new to tell me. I don't think there are any new declarations. So we come to the minutes of the last held on the 7th of April, and that's pages 1 to 10.
Councillor Peter Short
has left the conference.
That was first time anyone's left when I've announced the minutes, but he may just have slipped his phone and be back. Minutes of the last meeting then, the 7th of April, pages 1 to 10. Is there anything in there that anybody wants to comment on, or can we take it that they're a true and accurate record? Okay. Silence may indicate consent. It may just mean that you've got your mute button on, but either way, we'll take it that the minutes are okay. That brings us to matters arising and actions. Michelle, page 11.
Yes, Commissioner, there is only one in relation to the number of reports, and report authors have been told. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we move then to the next part of the agenda, which is force performance, and to begin with item 10, and that's the Sheffield District Summary. We've asked this time not for a written record, but for a verbal update, and Stuart Barden, the District Commander from Sheffield, will do that for us. And the reason for that is partly that we realise that this is a very busy time for the police, so we didn't want them to have to spend time writing a written report, but also things are moving very quickly, and we wanted to try and keep up with the pace of things. As far as Sheffield goes, Stuart, if I could just say this, and then I'll let you come in, is that I think there are two things that probably are on people's minds at the moment. One is around street begging, and the other is around the shootings, the recent shootings that happened over the weekend. So if you could say something around that. As far as the begging goes, I have had emails from people who are concerned about what they see as the return to the city centre of beggars, and some of that is fairly aggressive. I've had someone tell me about incidents at local supermarkets in the centre of town there, and they're concerned about that. They're concerned about the distance, or the lack of distance, between some of those beggars and people queuing at the supermarkets. So something about the aggressive begging, and then we'll move on to the recent shootings and your reading as to what you think is happening there. Stuart.
Okay, Commissioner. Do you want me to start with these two topics, or do you want me to give you a flavour and bring them into the presentation, or the quick 10 to 15 minutes?
That's fine. If you want to do it that way, that's fine.
Okay, so I'll talk through a little bit on performance, a bit on the NPT, naval policing teams, a bit on COVID for Sheffield, which will take into account the begging issues you've spoken about, a little bit around the Burglaries issues and the Nether Edge and Shadow ongoing disputes, and then a little bit on the staff as well, and current wellbeing of our own staff at Sheffield. So, performance-wise at Sheffield, headline figures, without going into the detailed percentages, that overall performance remains particularly strong. Arrests have continued to increase. Outcomes for victims have never been better. Excellent use of the Inspired to Change programme, which you yourself are supporting from the OPCC, so that's a real positive. Response times continue to show continual improvement. Sickness rates are low. Victim satisfaction levels, again, improving, and we've never had greater reductions in burglary and robbery over the last few weeks and months. I have to say, we all understand that some of that may be down to the current COVID situation. However, there's been a lot of work on the scenes as well to make sure that takes the right trend. Performance-wise, as I said, does remain strong. I'm still held to account on a quarterly basis by the ACCs, on a monthly basis by the Deputy Chief Constable at Force Performance Day, but from a Sheffield view, I'm really pleased where we're at the moment. I suppose more pleasing is what the work we're doing around our neighbourhood policing teams and how they've grown over the last 12 months. In September this year, we'll have another 21 officers join us from the Police Now scheme into Sheffield. I'm meeting them next week on the 19th of May, so that's another positive for us. And one of the key things for us is the introduction of the 5th neighbourhood policing team now in the Northwest, which is Inspector Kevin Smith, which is showing some really early results, promising returns. If you think back, Commissioner, 12 months ago, that was covered by the city centre and a vast area that had no police at all. But now we have a new inspector, we have sergeants, and we have new people out there policing the areas around Sotsbridge and other areas forward, etc., which will place in good stead for the return of the students later on this year. So that's a real positive. Neighbourhoods-wise, just briefly going through each one of them. The North East neighbourhood, Inspector Gary Bremwell. We've had some issues regarding COVID compliance, as you're aware of, you've seen in the media at Page Hall. That being said, as the Chief just reiterated there, these are only a very small few people, and the team have done a fantastic job with engaging, educating, using translators, students, trying to get the message out there around the safety of the public. So that's been a very positive, but we've still got some issues around Burglaries that we know, and it's been rightly highlighted within your violence reduction unit profile, is an area that we do need to work on going forward over the next few months. And we met last week as a community safety partnership to look at the plans around Burglaries and what we can do in a bit more detail over the next few months to try and tackle some of the issues, not just around violence, but also about fly tipping, litter, etc., etc. And that is something I'm keen to work on with the local authority. I am blessed in Burglaries. We do have an officer over there called Sergeant Ben Hall. Ben, a very proactive individual, out on the streets, stop checking those people that stop checking, taking positive action where he needs to. So we have a strong, healthy and very productive team. And whilst the North East does attract a busy area and is a busy place, we have the right people working in that area. South East, Manor and Arbourthorne, Commissioner, you were there that night with myself, stood at the front, following the tragic shooting of the 12-year-old. That's going back now to January now. But I was really heartened by what I thought was a positive reaction from the public as far as what we were trying to tell them and what we were promising them over the coming months. We have delivered that. Our Manor and Arbourthorne team has grown by a third over the last 3 months. Again, investment into neighbourhood policing. And I have to say that if there's anything that would come out of those tragic events of the 12-year-old, it was that I think our stronger connections with the community in Manor and Arbourthorne have never been better, with Tom Holland and his team doing a fantastic job over the last few weeks. Challenges in the city centre, and this is where I'll come on to the rough sleepers. I've seen some of the correspondence that you've received and sent on to me around some of the issues in the city. Probably slightly disappointed with some of the content of it. I understand people's views on the rough sleepers. We've put a tremendous amount of work in to try and look after some of these vulnerable people over the last few weeks through COVID. The regular meeting on a weekly basis, which Delphi Waring is part of, and I've delved into myself. We are trying to do our best to cater for some of these vulnerable and complex needs these people have over the last few weeks and months. And our small city centre team now has never been more on top of the issues within the city and trying to deal with it. I think there's some positives from COVID. One of those things is we probably do know who that cohort is now in greater detail than ever before. So I understand the views of the people that have written to you, but I can just try to reassure people that we have got a plan. We have got a plan on recovery as well as to what we're going to do, returning some of these people to the city or trying to find them homes and employment as time goes on. So there is a lot of positive work going in the background, and that is one of the priorities we've got going forward. Good news for the city centre, again, nighttime economy, 3 national awards over the last few weeks and months. Matt Bidet is a sergeant there, Purple Flag Award, and national awards. We do know that going forward that, again, as part of the gold plan for the ACC Hartley regarding the city centre, it is going to be a big issue around the return to the nighttime economy. It'll be interesting to see how many people decide to go into the city and those that don't in view of COVID, but I would imagine there will be a proportion that will want to go back out, enjoying themselves, and that will come demands in ourselves. So that is something we're planning towards. Southwest, this comes on to clearly Netheredge and Sharrow. You will have seen, I know we've had some contact with each other, the incidents over the last few days in Sharrow and Netheredge. You'll have seen in the Star today, Jamie Henderson, the DCI, and on the news today talking about our plans and what we are doing. Our approach is going to be very similar to that of Manor and Arbourthorne, in the fact we have people out there now, high visibility patrols, backed up with officers who are also in armed response vehicles, looking at supporting in certain zones and areas. We have intelligence cells that are set up to try and gather information for those who are responsible. We've had some excellent results over the weekend regarding people that have been charged and remanded into custody. But whilst we're doing that, we're also trying to build and reassure the public that we are taking some positive action. And again, I saw an email sent to yourself this morning, Commissioner, that we've already followed up, and the camera and CCTV that the person has been speaking about was actually put up yesterday afternoon, so that's already in place. It is going to be a testing few weeks. I don't think we've cracked it yet. It is 2 fueling groups that we need to work on. It will take some time. Our aim over the next few days, though, is to try and make sure that we are present and prevent any further incidents taking place. That is something we want to do with the neighbourhood policing teams and also force resources. And I've had contact with the ACC Forum over the last 24 hours, and there is a pledge from Force Command that we will get the required staff and people to ensure we can do what we can to prevent any further incidents taking place. I just want to talk a little bit about SNS, if you don't mind. I know you came down only a few weeks ago, and you sat to be one of our quarterly performance review meetings. I think you saw the work we're trying to do about repeat callers, which was quite positive. That is a very small unit. It continues to be productive. We currently have 25 community behaviour orders in place or being progressed, and also 7 closure orders. Sometimes the forgotten heroes of what we do in neighbourhood policing, but definitely a unit that is very productive at helping our neighbourhood policing teams. Finally, just to talk about our staff themselves, there's not a day goes by when you don't look at some of those rolling logs at Sheffield or those sports rolling logs and think about some of the bravery of our staff and the good work they're out there doing. numbers of students are healthy at the moment. They continue to increase. We will roll into the police education qualification framework as we move forward over the next few weeks and months. But generally across Sheffield at the moment, there is a real positive atmosphere. Sadly, we have had plenty of experiences where officers have been spat at, assaulted and coughed on through the COVID period. Fortunately, the courts have taken the right view of some of those incidents and sentenced appropriately, which is always reassuring to our staff in the fact that they're being looked after. But our key aim over the next few weeks is to look to build, following exiting COVID and what are our plans, and again, they've been developed with the Goal Group and ACC Hartley. On a positive note, just to end, it has been a long few weeks and months, in particular over the last few days with Jarrow and Nether Edge. I just want to place on record my thanks to the whole of my command team who worked extremely hard trying to piece together a plan which hopefully, like the man in our film, will be successful in the future.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, and thank you for what you said about the email I had from people in the Sharrow Nether Edge area to learn that you've been on the job there and already done something about CCTV. I think is really good, and I hope that they'll be impressed by that and recognise that you are indeed doing things. I was very pleased to hear you comparing what you're trying to do in the Sharrow Nether Edge area with Manor and Arbourthorne, because yes, I did join you up there for one of the meetings there, and I thought that was remarkable, the way a situation that could have been really, really bad was turned round by these activity there, and I think that community, again, insofar as I get responses from them, are very pleased with what has happened there, and a feeling that the police are on their side and batting for them and doing what they can. So thank you for all of that. Just on the rough sleepers, so that we don't get the wrong idea, I do also have people get in touch with me who are concerned about the welfare of the rough sleepers. So it's not all negative in the sense of wanting you to be, enforcing various things against them, but there are those who are concerned. So it's good to have reassurance around that as well. Yes, I did visit your little repeat callers unit and was very impressed by that, because clearly these are people with very complex needs who are constantly sort of coming your way again and again and again, and if that can be tackled, then that will make a huge difference. So glad to hear that that's still going well. I wondered if there was anything that any other officers wanted to add at this point, Chief.
I wonder if I might just come in at this point briefly, please, Commissioner, just to reiterate a couple of the points that Stuart's made, and to emphasise my own optimism about the real grip that they have in Sheffield, not least, of course, in terms of some topical current issues, but in terms of their approach to policing generally, which I think is a much improved and solidly performing district. Just in terms of recent concerns in and amongst the spate of shootings, that shootings, of course, always very concerning to the public. We take them very, very seriously. I am entirely content that senior people are very, very much across the detail here, and in terms of those people who are involved and engaged, I'm very clear that their time will come. There is a very proactive, substantial policing operation in place, both overt and covert, and the message to anybody who would seek to engage in firearms activity is your time is coming, because of the work that I know is being put in. And to the general public, of course, there should be some reassurance that for the most part, these are people who are all engaged in criminality, and these are tit-for-tat type events. Of course, the grave concern is that innocent people get caught up, which is why we always put this at the very top of our priority list. And the other point that I would just wish to give some emphasis to on a happier note is that Stuart rightly I think gave emphasis to the continuing growth in the neighbourhood function in Sheffield. Of course, that is replicated across the entire county, as I know you're very familiar with. I'm entirely convinced that the growth in the neighbourhood policing contingent, but perhaps more importantly, the quality of the work that those teams are doing, and we've hit upon one or two issues within Stuart's briefing, excuse me, already, of course, in terms of the quality of that engagement. I think that is underpinning a huge increase in confidence. And of course, we always look for data to support our belief, our assertion that confidence is bound to be increasing because of this extra effort. And therefore, at this juncture, I'd just like to reference a piece of I think, very welcome and authoritative data that's come in to support that assertion. We recently received the results of the Neighbourhood Alert Survey of 2020. The Neighbourhood Alert Survey, it's a national survey of all police forces. It's very substantial. I think this year they had something like 104,000 responses. The survey is only published in respect of those forces where there were more than 900 respondents. And we in South Yorkshire had over 4,200 respondents. And in respect of the central question, which is to state a percentage of people who in turn state that their confidence in the police has increased over the last 12 months, of the 26 forces reported upon, SYP is at the very top. And so in the last 12 months, there has been a 67.5% increase in the number of people who have stated that their confidence in the police has increased. I just think that is a huge pat on the back, predominantly for our neighbourhood policing teams, but actually for everybody else in the force, because this ultimately is the lifeblood of policing. It is the confidence of the people that we serve. And so it's just an opportune moment to just put a bit of a plug in for what I think is an extraordinary outturn, not one that we, of course, are complacent about, and we will continue to try and do more. But if we might, as part of the minutes, we can establish the link to the survey results, and I guess for those representatives of the press, there is a quick link on www.neighbourhoodalert.co.uk/2020 National Survey. We'll put that link on the minutes, but I think there's some really good news in that, Commissioner, which speaks, I think, in a complementary term to that which Stuart has outlined in Sheffield and wider across the county.
Thank you very much. Yes, I have seen the table, and we've got it in the office, so if anyone wants to get hold of that quickly, Fiona Toplis can put you in touch with that, and that goes for the Police and Crime Panel as well, and I'm sure will be interested in that. Thank you very much, Chief. Stuart, there were just a couple of things that I wanted to pick up further on. One was the burglary and robberies. You mentioned in passing that they were down, and I wondered whether you could say just a little bit more about that, and in particular whether that applied to commercial burglaries as well as residential.
Yeah, we were worried about the commercial at first because obviously vacant premises, in particular on the city centre. But what we've actually seen, if you look at commercial burglaries from January through to March and then into April, within the city, the numbers have dropped from around the 70s mark to actually about 13 in the April time. So a lot of that I don't think is just COVID related. John Mallows and his team in the city centre have been focusing on 4 or 5 individuals, a couple of brothers in particular, who were arrested in the city centre, who received custodial sentences of over a year and one of them over 3 years after receiving 7 or 8 charges for offences of breaking into commercial premises in the city centre. So John and his team, as soon as COVID came in, really kicked into the city. A lot of work through the bid and other commercial premises as well to ensure that they were safe and the premises protected, but on the back of that, locking up the right people as well. So I've been quite pleased with that. Just residential burglaries. Again, we've got a small team of people here who've been looking at some of the key burglars across Sheffield And the work that Lee Corker and his team have pulled out the bag with regards to some of the arrests recently of known burglars and currently suspects that are wanted for burglary has been phenomenal. And yes, COVID has made a difference. There's no doubt about it. We have seen around a 40% reduction in burglary, but I also have to give them the pat on the back is that they're continuing to look for those opportunities and have done some sterling work.
Thank you very much indeed. And just the final thing I wanted to comment on was the Police Now officers coming in. You said you had 21 coming in this autumn. These, of course, are the mainly young people who have done very well in their universities and have had this intensive course of training, then come in with the all filled with problem-solving ideas. Is that the group we're talking about?
It is, Commissioner. Yeah, like I say, we've got 21. They land for the first day into Sheffield next week on the 19th of May. I'll be doing a meet and greet. The fortunate thing is that we had 4 Police Now officers join us probably about 2 years ago. Frank, Libby, Nick and Megan, fantastic people, integrated well into the neighbourhoods, definitely proved their worth as far as coming in and looking at some real localised problems. We remember that Libby was hugely responsible for the issues around the cathedral and Spice, which took us over to America to try and win the Goldstein Award. So we are getting some quality officers coming into the organisation. I'm hoping the 21 are just as good as the 4 that we've had. They'll go away for the summer months, they'll do their training, they'll be back with us in September. And again, another strength of the neighbourhood policing teams that we didn't have 2 to 3 years ago, building on what the Chief just talked about the confidence and how we deal with community problems.
So fresh blood, fresh ideas, and
exactly.
People coming from anywhere in the country, all over the country in fact.
It's a national programme, but I think the vast majority of the people that are coming, I think this is the case, are based around our region. I'll get to the northern more next week. We've got an event where the 4 previous Police Now students are coming along as well, talking about their experience. It's still very new. It's different to organisations, but from what I've seen and the calibre of the person we're attracting, we'll certainly get it right. So again, it's another entry route into this organisation, along with the PEQF, which is coming down the line, that's going to broaden some of the experiences brought to South Yorkshire.
That's great. And I was glad to hear that you're finding some of the data that the violence reduction units are able to get together now as to where the violence hotspots are across the county. You're finding that useful?
Yeah, the profile was really useful. I mean, Burglaries and Firth Park and other areas are jumping out of places that we need to, as a community safety partnership, concentrate and invest our funds into. So we discussed it last week at the Community Safety Partnership exec meeting. I was chairing that with Paul Wood. The local authority have taken the plan away. They're still discussing and reviewing as to how that will fit into business. But I'm a firm believer that the profile gives us something that we can work to over the next 12 months and align some of our CSP spending to that as well.
Great, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wants to make a comment or ask a question of Stuart? If not, we can let you get back to your work, Stuart. Thank you very much indeed. And
thank you, Commissioner. Speak soon. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. So moving on the agenda then to item 11, which
has left the conference.
The force performance report against the police and crime plan. And the area that we're focusing on today is protecting vulnerable people. I think probably this is Mark doing this, the introduction of this.
Commissioner, it's Tim. I'm going to present this paper today.
Okay, Tim Forbert. So rather than sort of go through it in that way, if I can just take you to particular things, and then if there's something that you particularly wanted to talk about and I've missed, you can bring us back to that if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking at the report itself, the theme, protecting vulnerable people, and I think as a general thing, if we can just hold in mind that clearly my concerns are what exactly is happening to victims of crime in the present crisis, in the present COVID crisis. One of those, if I take you down page 13, this is 3.3, I think, domestic abuse. A lot of discussion around this, both locally and nationally, and some puzzling the one hand, we seem to have some national helplines that saying there's been a huge increase in numbers of people reporting into the national helplines around domestic abuse. On the other hand, we seem to get accounts saying that there have been few referrals or not as the increase that people were expecting during this lockdown period doesn't seem to have happened. So it's trying to make sense of that and whether there are victims who are not able to get through to the agencies and the police, and something perhaps about what the South Yorkshire have done to help potential victims of domestic abuse.
Okay, Commissioner. Well, I mean, to start off with, let's set it in context. Domestic abuse, as well as child abuse, is so often a hidden crime. And when communities retreat into themselves, as they've had to do within lockdown, the danger is always that crime becomes more hidden, with less opportunity for people to report, whether it's to work colleagues, whether it's to friends. It has obviously been right from the start of lockdown a key concern of the force about how we go about dealing with this. You're absolutely right that nationally some of the domestic abuse helplines have seen an increase in calls, but nationally across the board, forces have only seen about 1% increase in the level of reported domestic abuse. And that varies across the country. In the first few weeks of lockdown, we actually recorded fewer domestic abuse investigations, and by about week 2, it returned to normal levels. But since week 4 of the lockdown, we've started to now see increased reporting. And just to put that in context, the weekly average for the 52 weeks prior to lockdown starting, we average about 650 domestic abuse incidents a week. Weeks 4, 5 and 6 of lockdown, that's been between 721 and 764. So you get a sense for, we're recording on average about 60 to 70 more domestic abuse incidents a week, approximately a 14% increase over the last couple of weeks. So we are now starting to see that increase manifest itself in increased reports to the police. We've had one domestic homicide over the period of lockdown. That was in Barnes. I won't say any more about that because there's obviously ongoing criminal proceedings. But we do take this very seriously. The big concern is that when people are locked down and effectively locked away with potential perpetrators, the opportunity for them to report is obviously more challenging. So we've undertaken a number of measures to combat that. Firstly, we've urgently developed an online reporting platform that allows people to report online. The solution has an immediate shutdown facility if the victim who's trying to report is disturbed by a perpetrator. That provides an accessible channel straight into our control room, and it's dealt with in exactly the same way as if the victim had contacted us by phone. The information is risk assessed, recorded as an incident, and graded in exactly the same way. And it's specifically for domestic abuse victims. So we've actually seen that come on stream from week 5 of the lockdown, and in the first week of operation there were 36 online reports through that medium. So that's the first thing that we've put in place. Secondly, you'll be we're online reporting is not an option for the victim. Another more immediate way of doing it is through a silent solution, where if someone rings 999, if they're not able to talk to the police, we've introduced a facility where they can press 55 during a 999 call, and that then will alert us to the fact that this potentially is a domestic abuse incident that we can then grade and respond to. We've undertaken a radio advert to advertise that, promoting the 999 solution. That's gone out on the global radio network. That includes Capital FM, Hearts, Capital Extra, Smooth, LDC and Radio X. We've used South Yorkshire Police alerts to reach out to communities about this. So we put in 2 specific measures that will increase the ability of people living in lockdown to report domestic abuse where that's taking place. I'll just go on to talk a little bit about some of the other campaigns that we've done during this period. So a short leaflet's been produced about who's pulling your strings to outline where people can get help during COVID-19. That's designed to make sure that both our officers and staff have got the very latest contact information to provide to members of the public who are suffering domestic abuse. And we've also undertaken an internal campaign to make sure that any of our employees that wish to report third-party domestic abuse can do that effectively. So all in all, as I say, we've put in place a number of different mediums to enable people to report. We are now starting to see an increase in reporting. That's what we predicted would happen at the start of lockdown. It's what the third-party reporting helplines have suggested is happening, and we're now starting to see that flow through. And obviously, it's always been the case with domestic abuse that if it's not reported, there's very little we can do about it. So it's quite pleasing in some way now to see that these measures are starting to have an impact, because if we know about it, we can do something about it. I'll just pause there if there's any questions about that.
We've got someone who's not got their button on mute, I think, and is typing. Just to intervene at the on page 14, you mentioned the Inspire to Change programme. So that is continuing during this period of lockdown. This is a programme for those people who feel that they may be offenders rather than victims of domestic abuse. Could you say quickly a word about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's continuing. I think it's also worth just mentioning, just highlighting paragraph 7, it's 3.7 as well, because one of the ways to deal with domestic abuse is to put some space between the victim and perpetrator. That allows us to put support services into the victim, but also where there's a recognition by the perpetrator that they want to change their behaviour, it gives us the opportunity to do that. So the use of domestic violence protection notices to create that space is really important. And you'll be aware through previous conversations and previous times that I've talked about this at your Public Accountability Board. The South Yorkshire Police now is a leading force in terms of our use of domestic violence protection notices, but the drain on resources to be able to do that effectively has been something of a challenge over recent months, and as you're aware, we've invested in a specific team now, sat within our legal services team, to actually take those notices forward, go to court, and get the notices and to deal with the breaches at court. That's now been underway since it began full operation in week 2 of lockdown. And in the first month of operation of that team, it applied for 69 domestic violence protection notices, which 53 of which resulted in an order at court. And that's the highest number of orders that we've had since January. We're really pleased with the progress of that team. I think that we're getting these orders more consistently, more efficiently, and that's really, really important, because, as I say, the use of those orders is the best way to safeguard victims, particularly when there's no possibility of a judicial outcome. It's the best way to safeguard victims. It's the best way to create space between the victim and perpetrator, and that then gives the very best opportunity for support services such as Inspire to Change, but a whole range of victim services to get in there and to actually prevent it happening again. And so often, that's the outcome that victims of domestic abuse want. They want it to stop, not happen again.
The domestic violence protection notice is what you initiate, the police, and then the court ratify or affirm that with an order. And
so
conversion rate, that's the key then.
It is a key. So So if we have someone in custody who we think is suitable for a domestic violence protection notice, that has to be authorised by a superintendent. And that basically places conditions effectively separating the two parties. It may require the perpetrator to live elsewhere, not to come within a certain distance of the address, contain non-contact provisions. If we issue one of those notices, that has to go to the magistrate's court the following day within 24 hours, and effectively the magistrate's court ratify those conditions, and they can set additional conditions, they can disagree, they can vary them, but effectively they create that into an order that lasts for up to 28 days, and that's then what creates that opportunity, that space for support services to operate unfettered by the fact of the relationship.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Can I take you on to 3.8, where we talk about child abuse? And I'm just anxious to know what's happening now that children are not in school, or at least not in school in numbers anymore. What that does to alerting schools to what's happening to their children. Does that continue, or is that in abeyance? What's happening there?
Well, I mean, the issue is that it is a cause of concern that so often the signs of child abuse are picked up in places of education, and clearly that's not happening whilst kids aren't in school. And as I say, it's a hidden crime. What we have done is been very, very clear with our officers that they are much likely to come into contact with a higher proportion of vulnerable children than they would otherwise do. So what we have done is reinforce our training around looking for signs of vulnerability. We call it professional curiosity. Officers will be get called to domestic settings over a whole range of issues. Now that could be unrelated crime, it could be domestic abuse, it could be COVID-related issues, it could be for any reason. What we have sought to do is to reinforce the concept of professional curiosity, to be looking for signs that something isn't right, because we think that if you look at our totality of child abuse reports, a far higher proportion of those during lockdown will come internally through, it could be police officers, it could be investigation officers going to deal with other crime, it could be PCSOs working within our neighbourhoods. We see a far higher proportion coming to our notice through that medium, as opposed to third-party professional reports through schools. So it's something that we're alive to, but it is a concern, and it remains a concern for us that the absence of children in school means that some of these crimes might not be picked up in the same way that they would be outside of lockdown.
I'm glad you referred to it in your report, because it clearly is an anxiety with the schools being closed as to what's happening to the children. And normally, as you say, that the schools would pick up on. So I'm very glad to hear about the police response there, and this phrase, professional curiosity, which I think is really important.
Well, you recall some time back we introduced a vulnerability assessment framework, which is a standardised framework that we ask officers to use when they're dealing with any incident to assess the level of vulnerability, and it provides a template for them to use to just try and spot the signs, and it's a matter of us continuing to reinforce that during these difficult and challenging times.
Yeah. Thank you. Moving you on to 3.11, suicide. This again is rather like domestic abuse. It's one of those areas where I think everyone's expecting an increase in the number of suicides, and the whole question of people's mental health. But this suggests something a little bit different. Could you comment around that?
Well, I mean, it is a challenging one, isn't it? I think it's very hard for me to comment on the impact of lockdown on mental health, because at the end of the day, I'm not a medical professional, but I think common sense would tell us that people who are socially isolated from society, if they're already suffering mental health issues, you would expect that those mental health may suffer a deterioration if they're not supported in the same way. I think, it does. We all hear concerning reports in the media that demands on the NHS across the board, other than COVID-related demands, are down really significantly. And I do worry about people not accessing services if they need them. I know the message from the NHS is very clear that it's open for business. So we've not seen that manifest itself. I think that doesn't mean to say that we won't as we go forward, because I think the longer that lockdown goes on, the more challenges that presents. But we've just not seen a significant increase in the number of suicides. But we have seen, an increase of tag calls around mental health. So it is featuring, but not to the degree where it's driving people to suicide.
Yes, I suppose it's a bit unfair. I wasn't really asking you to comment from a medical or psychological perspective, but simply to note the fact that we haven't seen that increase here in South Yorkshire, at least not yet, which is good. Good thing. Just finally, I wanted if you could say something about what's happening to criminality through the COVID period. Whether there's anything we can say there yet. This is 313, I think. Is criminality changing? Are people finding different ways of pursuing criminal activities? Just something around that.
So, what I'll say first of all is crime has been down during the period of lockdown, and significantly so. Certainly, last week we were looking at a 19% reduction on the 12-week average in terms of overall crime. And as you would imagine, without a nighttime economy, the nighttime economy violence is significantly down to non-existence in cases. Offences like residential burglary are down really significantly, as you'd expect, because people aren't leaving the homes; they're in the home all day long. So we have seen a shift, and we have seen, certainly seen some issues around fraud increasing. Now we're alive to that. Through our crime support hub, we have a fraud prevent officer that is constantly looking for opportunities to provide crime prevention advice to vulnerable victims. We have a really robust fraud triage service that identifies trends and allows us to be able to target both victims and crime types that we see emerging. So we have seen things like online and phone scams from people claiming to be medical representatives, people offering to shop for the elderly and taking advance payment. Online notifications of financial reductions for tax-related purposes. These are all things that we have seen sight of. So we've been quite proactive in terms of our crime prevention advice. What's also quite pleasing to see, and I'm sure you've probably seen it yourself, is a lot of the financial institutions are also actually spending some money and doing quite a bit of proactive fraud crime prevention advice themselves. So certainly, I know Lloyds Bank, I think it was, I was here the other day, we're out in the media talking about the standard policies and procedures and how they will never ask for personal details over the phone, and highlighting the sort of method of operating of potential fraud scams. So I think there's plenty of collective effort around it, but we just want to continue to reinforce all our standard public safety advice around reducing the risk of online fraud. So that's about never ever giving personal details over the phone or online, in an unsolicited email. About password security, about not having the same password for all your different businesses that you do online, and generally just being alive to the fact that people will seek to exploit the opportunities that lockdown brings, particularly when the opportunities to commit different types of crime are not there.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else that you wanted to comment on that we've missed?
times that the resilience of our workforce has been really good during this crisis. We're still providing absolutely a full policing service, and whilst we're really pleased with the resilience of our workforce and the way that people have stepped up to do this, and it's a difficult job. We've had officers who have been dealing with increased sudden deaths in the community, which is a really difficult job, and we've done an awful lot to look after the well-being of our employees through the COVID coordination group. So there's regular alerts going out to make sure that we maintain that resilience of our workforce. It's really important when officers are coming to work and dealing with some of the difficult, challenging aspects thrown up by this dreadful disease that we continue to look after them. So just wanted to highlight that as well.
You're absolutely right, and I think we should minute our thanks to the workforce, South Yorkshire Police, because they are at the sharp end, and some of the situations that some individual officers have been placed in have been pretty horrible. So we're really pleased to hear what you say about the care that you're taking over the welfare of the workforce as a whole. Thank you very much. Is there anybody who wants to make any comments or ask any questions from the force or OPCC or wherever? Everybody happy with that? So shall we move then to the next item on the agenda, which is item 12? Debbie, I think you were on my list. You are there. So this is the draft outturn report for 2019-20, and I just wonder whether there's anything you wanted to point to on that.
What I'll do, Commissioner, is I'll just run through the high-level numbers, and then I'll be guided by yourself as to how much detail you want me to go into, or if I just take questions.
Yep.
So starting with the outturn on the revenue budget, we have a £1.2 million underspend, which is just under 0.5% of the total budget. The graph there on the first page shows that is made up of various unders and overs, the biggest underspend being in the supplies and services area. Legacy costs are underspent by 4.95 million. This reflects the Home Office funding of 85% of each of the legacy elements, where the 15% is funded by the force. This is a more favourable position than we've had in previous years where special grant rules have been applied. The force have overachieved its savings target by 660,000, achieving total savings of 4.6 million during the year. And we have a capital variation of £8 million. And just to add on that one, that Sophie, Jackie and myself have held a series of meetings, and we're bringing the challenge and the due diligence to the current capital plan, try and set those realistic targets for the current year, and that work is ongoing at the moment. So just very quickly running through the key points. Districts and departments have delivered on their SDT approved bids. We have incurred costs during the year on the floods to the tune of around £260,000. We're not expecting any funding for that. COVID, as expected, has had an impact in a number of ways. We have expenditure not incurred because expenditure has slipped, orders haven't been delivered, equipment, etc., not been delivered by the end of the year as expected, and that's to the tune of 420,000. That will obviously be an added pressure to the 2021 revenue budget. We have also seen £2 million of capital slippage. So the £8 million I've just referred to, the capital variation, £2 million of that £8 million is as a result of COVID, vehicles and equipment not being delivered, premises schemes being paused. We have incurred additional costs related to COVID, mainly PPE, of around 320,000. And then just to add there, the extent of the impact on 2021 is difficult to assess and cost at this point in time. We are capturing those costs. We will be monitoring it. We do, in fact, have a return to make by the end of the week, which will be going to the government to keep them informed, and I believe this will be a monthly return. And just to add there that the Home Office have repurposed the uplift ring-fenced funding, which equates to £2.1 million for South Yorkshire, and this has been repurposed to cover COVID-related costs, so that this does give us some financial resilience in this area. And then lastly there, in terms of key points, we have fully utilised the Operation Uplift grant in 1920. So that is just a very quick run through the high-level numbers. I'm happy to go through the remainder of the report or just take questions and will be guided by you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, and good to hear some of the things that you were saying, particularly around the capital programme that you'll be working with my office to get that right, because we have had real issues in the past about slippage, so it's good to hear that. As far as the floods and the Belwyn formula goes, if I understood you were right there, you were saying you're not expecting to get anything back for that. Is that the case? Or, I mean, how does Belwyn work? Do you have to apply for
Mark Roberts, Deputy Chief Constable.
Mark
has left the conference.
I don't have the fine detail to hand on the Belwyn. I believe this is generally driven by the local authorities, and at this point in time we haven't received any notification of any funding.
Okay, that may be something we need to chase up then. COVID-19 expenditure, you're right. The Minister said right at the beginning of the crisis that spend what you have to and all will be repaid, but the message seems to be a bit more nuanced now, in that it's a net figure you're going to arrive at, because there'll be some spending that you won't have incurred as a result of COVID, as well as spending that you will have incurred, so they'll be doing some kind of netting off, I think, but we do expect some funding back for COVID expenditure.
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, and I think the Chief will probably add that the repurposing of the uplift ring fence funding, excuse me, this has caused some questions, obviously, from those forces who are relying on that money to fund the uplift programme. We are quite fortunate in South Yorkshire that we aren't actually relying on that in the current year. We're relying on it going forward. So that does give us particularly some financial resilience, but it will certainly be a problem for other forces that are using that for uplift. So I think what we're picking up, the suggestion is that that is for cash flow purposes at the moment, and we would hope to recoup some of that money in the future. But you're right, there's a lot of uncertainty around this at the moment.
There are some persons, you're right, who are as far as cash flow goes, they are in a difficult position. And of course, we're all waiting now for the council tax to come through. And I know that there are some issues. I don't know whether we picked anything up in South Yorkshire greatly, but some parts of the country where clearly they're struggling a bit with council tax.
We are expecting. This is one of the areas where COVID will impact. We are expecting reductions in the council tax collection fund, but based on conversations I've had with Sophie, that is something that will hit in 21-22. Hopefully it won't hit this year for us, but I think our best estimate at this stage is around £1 million of lost income.
Yeah.
Can I confirm that was with the last discussions I've had with the local authorities? That is the case, but we're not expecting it to hit until next year, because the way in which the council tax collection fund works, any under or overspend in the previous year gets passed on to us in the following year. But it could be that position may change depending on what happens nationally. And just in relation to the uplift grant and the repurposing of that, we are keeping an eye on that nationally as well through PACs and various other bodies that we're all members of, to try and get a more accurate position as and when it arises, or we've had any confirmation from the Home Office.
Yeah. Was that the Chief trying to come in?
Yes, I was just going to echo, frankly, the point. Just as I was trying to come in, I think the point I was seeking to make has already been made, and that is that our understanding is that the repurposing of the uplift grant is purely to meet the short-term cash flow issues of some forces which do not include us, and so we have no information to suggest that the uplift grant, having been repurposed, will come at the expense of the fulfilment of the uplift program. So we're pretty confident about that.
seems to be a bit like the Archers, something that goes on and on with it. How near are we to the end of the crime review?
Well, the crime review is in stages. So the one being referred to here is the phase one, and we've got further phases that will be going ahead. But in relation to this, yes, there have been significant underspends as a result of the crime review and vacancies. But I've just checked latest information, and my understanding is that we're now up to strength within that area. In fact, I think we may even be over strength at the end of the year, so we've certainly pulled that back throughout the year.
That's phase one, and then there's phase two. Are there further phases beyond that then? Is it like the Filth Bridge? Does it...
Commissioner, it's Tim Former. Can I come in there, please?
Tim?
Yeah, so there are a number of different phases, and yes, there is another phase to come after that. So you'll be aware that phase one of the crime review effectively encompassed the creation of a new major crime unit to manage the principally homicide investigation, the return of the force crime units to districts, and the disaggregation of our PVP teams across districts.
Yeah.
That was phase one. Phase two has been very much about Force Intelligence Bureau, reorganising that to make sure it's fit for the future and can provide the really dynamic and accurate and sufficiently skilled analytical supports to drive forward our proactive policing requirements. And that's divided into a number of different subunits. So part of it is FIB, but the other bit is looking at things like the digital forensics unit to make sure that we've got sufficient capacity to deal with the ongoing exponential growth in the management of digital evidence. And the third phase then will look at our remaining specialist crime assets. So that'll be, principally the covert policing side that the public never sees. So our surveillance teams and that level of capability. So there will be another phase at the conclusion of this. So whilst it does go on and on, it's not endlessly repeating itself. It is looking at what is actually a very broad spectrum of policing across the force.
So the things you mentioned, they're not concurrent then, they are sequential? Or...
Yeah, they are sequential, yeah, because, again, these in themselves are big change projects, and it was really important that we dealt with, if you go back 3 years ago, the acute need was to get PVP on a sustainable footing under district control to make sure that we had a district CID office that could support the investigation of crime locally, because it wasn't working as a centralised unit, and the creation of a dedicated major crime unit to manage principally homicide, because we had a situation where whenever we had a murder investigation, we were pulling detectives in from all over the force, and that was just unsustainable. So these are big change projects which require significant central support, and it's just simply untenable to do them all at the same time. So we did the first one. We've more or less finished the second one, and throughout the course of this financial year, the next we will complete phase three.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to comment or ask a question? If not, can we say thank you very much, Debbie, for that report. That was item 12. Moving on to Chief Executive's report, item 13, public engagement update. Fiona, this is you, 25 to 30.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. This is Port Street speaks for itself. I just want to add in there that just some context around it. We would normally be out and about engaging face-to-face with members of the public, partners and others during these times. It's slightly different, so we're trying to do it online just to sort of gauge public opinion at the moment, see where they are, see how they're feeling, as well as engage with partners and others over the telephone and online. Overall, I think it's a very positive picture. The public seem to have welcomed the forces approach to how they're enforcing the legislation. The education and engagement programme seems to have gone down quite well. Just a couple of areas within the Page Hall and the Hexthorpe area where people would like to see a little bit more enforcement. However, we have noted just how well the neighbourhood policing teams are doing, working with communities to try and get that message over without going in sort of heavy-handed. There's a lot of good work gone on there, which we see online, a lot of engagement. Just as we we would come out of lockdown, or as we sort of ease towards a future where we can see that the lockdown will ease, we will expect a sort of a return away from the COVID type reports and into the more normal engagement that we would normally see, more reports of things around off-road bikes, fly tipping, things like that, and ASB probably coming back on board, but we'll look out for that in the next couple of months and see how that goes as we ease out of lockdown. Certain areas have non-policing concerns, really, fly tipping's increased, etc. We've seen that, garden fires, and we would expect now the tips in other places are starting to open, we hopefully see a reduction in things like that. Lots of positive comments as well. Public are grateful to the key workers and quite happy to engage in the support there, which includes the police officers as well as the shopkeepers, doctors, nurses, etc. Correspondence with the public, we've continued to receive correspondence along certain themes around the legislation. We've had a couple of people, not many, one or two unhappy with police action that have raised that with yourself via email, concerns around lack of PPE, all sorts of things coming up there. But overall, I think positive picture, but we'll see how that changes in the coming weeks and months as we go into easing of the lockdown.
Thank you very much. Colleagues from the local authorities are constantly getting at me about fly tipping, which seems to be a growing issue. I have to sort of say to them, as gently as I can, that fly tipping is really a matter for the local authorities in the first place, rather than the police. But the police do get drawn into this, so I think it is something that we sadly are going to have to return to as COVID comes towards an end. But just for noting that one. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Fiona, I cut you off. You wanted to...
I was just going to add on to this week, the recycling centres have opened and household waste centres, so we would hopefully will note over the next coming weeks to see whether that reduces as well.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fiona. That was pages 25 to 30, item 13. If we move on to 40, item 14, PCC's decisions. Erica, 31 to 34.
Yes, thanks, Commissioner. This is a report that we bring to each Public Accountability Board, which sets out the key decisions that are mainly of significant public interest to report to this board. So set out from paragraph 4.3 onwards is a little bit of detail with regards to each of the decisions that you've made. I won't go through those in any detail, but if anybody wants to ask any questions, then I'm happy to take those. Thanks, Commissioner.
I don't think I have any. Does anybody have a question or comment? Well, thank you very much. Shall we move to 15 then, the PAB work programme? Michelle, 35 and 38.
Commissioner, there's nothing really to comment on there. It's provided for everybody to know what's coming up. The only thing to note, I suppose, is that the neighbourhood policing evaluation and scrutiny work that has occurred has seen a draft report come to you. We're just evolving some of the report around next steps so that we can discuss with the senior command team, and then that will come to a future PAB, but we're unable to say when that will be, depending on how long those steps take, first of all.
Okay, thank you. We'll note that. So moving on then to the assurance panel reporting. Andrew, the independent ethics panel, pages 39 to 42. Do you want to point us to anything there?
Yes, thank you, Alan. There are three matters dealt with in the report, and I think all of them need a brief comment. The first is in relation to our role in your statutory responsibilities for equality, diversity and inclusion in policing. We get an occasional report on statistics which help us advise you on this. The most recent statistics which we considered, which I've set out in that report, have good news in relation to the continuing rise in the number of women among police officers, now at 34.2% and well above the national average for policing. However, there are two factors of concern in relation to Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups and indeed also visible minority ethnic groups. And the first is in relation to recruitment into the force. In the last quarter, there was just one BAME officer recruited. Previous quarters have seen an average of, the last two were 4 and 3. Now, there may be a number of reasons for this decline. Obviously, the absolute numbers are not enormous, but it was of concern to the panel. And in particular, the panel wondered whether this might have been partly due to the fact that the force have lost its positive outreach lead, someone I think who works in the HR department. And we encouraged the force to make fresh arrangements there because the advice we received from Inspector Mellors, who's the force lead, is that the positive outreach individual had been making a considerable difference in encouraging BAME members to be interested in a career in the police. So that's the first item of concern.
Can I just stop you there, Andrew, and see whether the Chief wants to comment on that, or indeed any of the officers want to comment on that?
Yes, I note the point. It is, of course, the case that a very valued member of staff has left, but of course, important to note that somebody has been recruited in her stead, and it isn't that because the individual's left, all positive action has stopped. Of course, much positive action is built into our processes, into our outreach, into our having force ambassadors more broadly positioned across the wider organisation. We engage with minority communities through some of our staff associations and some of our police officers who are members of those staff associations take on that ambassadorial role. So it wouldn't be fair to suggest that all positive action sits on the narrow shoulders of an individual, however good that individual was. But I think the point is certainly taken that this is an ongoing battle. I would caution against reading too much into a single intake. Of course, that we do need to view this in the round, and as more people come through in terms of the pipeline, then the statistical representation of those being recruited becomes increasingly robust. I wouldn't. I personally think it is a little early to draw too strong a conclusion from the data, but of course, the point I think is well made and is something that we are conscious of.
Yeah, and given the sheer numbers that we're going to be recruiting over the next few years, hopefully that will see an improvement in the BAME representation. Andrew, do you want to carry on?
No, it was only, I entirely take the point that the Chief has made. Our role, of course, is merely to flag up difficulties as they arise. I think it was right to do that. I'm, however, reassured by what the Chief has said. There was another aspect to minority ethnic roles within the force, and that's to be found at the top of the next page. So there's also an issue in relation to the number of BAME sergeants in the force. A number of BAME sergeants were promoted to inspector during 2019, and a sort of gap has opened up below. We don't know enough about this, and we suggested that I think the deputy was with us as we were discussing this, that it might be worth looking to see whether this is unique to South Yorkshire, and if it is, or if there are only a few forces who find themselves in this position, it'd be worth conducting a review with other forces as to good practice, whether good practice can be identified from elsewhere.
Okay, we await developments there.
Yep. So in relation to the second area of activities, stop and search, we had, I think, probably for the first time, a historical analysis of stops and searches in the last 2 years. We've talked about this on a number of occasions at PAB, but I think I'm right in saying it was the first time we've seen the statistics for a prolonged period, and they have the good news. They showed the good news that despite the huge increase in stops and searches, as officers have regained their confidence in conducting stops and searches, the positive outcomes remain steady within the range 20 to 25%. An issue we have discussed at PAB before, but I've never reported in writing on, was the panel's work on ethnic disproportionality in stops and searches. You'll remember, Alan, that the panel felt that the census data from 2011, upon which proportionality is calculated for stops and searches, is now so out of date as probably not to be worth paying much attention to. Instead, the panel has been seeking to gather information about ethnic proportionality within the upper echelons of school students, the people who are effectively emerging onto the street and might be the subject of stops and searches. And there the figures are considerably higher. But we only have those figures, the figures for black and ethnic minority members of the community are higher than in the 2011 census. And while this might be put right next year when the 2021 census takes place, we're hoping to complete our work on this by obtaining the relevant figures for the other South Yorkshire boroughs, Doncaster, Barnsley and Rotherham. And the office, I think, Alan, is going to work with you in trying to obtain those figures from the local authorities. Yeah. So that's an important piece of work, because it puts right, or it may put right, a picture which perhaps has become slightly inaccurate, more than slightly inaccurate, over the country, because as figures have got out of date.
No, I think you're right. I think it could have national significance, because everywhere you go, people are comparing the situation now, as far as stop and search goes, and who gets stopped and searched, with a national figure that is, as you say, is 10 years out of date. It's an absurdity, and I can't think of any other sets of figures where such a thing would be embarked upon, but we could go on doing it. And we may be beating ourselves up in some respects for nothing.
Or allowing other people to beat us up, yes.
Allowing others to beat us, yes. We need to know more accurately. Lovely, thank you. And you had a third thing, or was that?
Well, the third thing is I won't spend long on, because we've talked about the COVID pandemic, but just to record that we're getting on with the work you asked us to do. The feedback we've had through members and through monitoring the media and so on accords almost entirely with what's been reported in terms of public reaction. We are beginning to think about future policing issues as members of the public emerge from the very strict lockdown we've had. There have been some, you may or may not know this, there have been some very useful fact sheets produced by the Legal Services Department of SYP, which have sought to put right misconceptions, for example, about what's guidance and what is law. The force can only enforce the law, obviously not the guidance. And I hope the Chief or others could confirm that that when tomorrow's new guidance comes out, as I understand it will, or guidance and/or regulations, that the Legal Services Department will do that very useful work again. Useful, of course, to us, but more importantly, useful to the force as a whole.
I'm sure that will continue. Thank you very much, Andrew. Was there any comment or question from anyone around the IEP report?
I can give that assurance around legal advice. That is work that is ongoing, and of course, what perhaps isn't commonly understood is the the advice that was adopted by the Crown Prosecution, the College of Policing, MPCC, was very much a derivative of that which was produced by our own legal team. So the guidance that they're producing is first class, and of course it does accurately reflect, and in this Andrew's absolutely right, and it's a subtle point that's sometimes lost, and that is that the guidance reflects the legislation. It doesn't reflect an interpretation of what we wish the legislation might have said, and that is an important distinction in terms of policing.
Thank you for that. And perhaps we can note in the minutes that the work that the legal department has done around this, and that it has had that national significance, because that is important. Thank you very much. I think that's everything on that, Andrew. Moving then to item 17, which is JIAC exception reporting. Steve, 43 to 46. Anything you want to draw our attention to there?
Just a few things, Commissioner. The first thing is point number one, that the JIAC member cadre has been resolved for the next 12 months, so we've managed to reappoint people to make sure that we're fully staffed for that time. Atlas Court continues to be discussed. I've had more information since this report, where most of the technology issues are largely resolved, and that there are plans to deal with the other issues that crop up. Work is ongoing to build a joint governance framework. It's slowed down a little bit because of COVID, because we need to be in the room together, to be quite honest, to finalise that. We're also conscious that the national Operation Uplift needs to remain on track, and we were advised that it is. Internal audit report, internal audit plan for the coming year is on track. And the thing that I want to draw out mostly is that external audit is a bit of a concern. Timetables, as I'm sure you're aware, the presentation of accounts and annual reports have been relaxed. The dates are in the report. But we're waiting. I think Sophie had a meeting with external audit last week, and we're waiting to find out whether they've got the resources to meet the new timetable. But other than that, Commissioner, I don't think there's anything else I want to pick out.
Thank you very much. And I had a conversation with Paul Grady, the external auditor, the other day, and that seemed to go well. So I think, as you say, we're on track there. Anybody want to ask any questions or comment on the JIAC report? If not, thank you very much indeed, Steve. So we come to the end of the meeting. Is there any other business? There can't be, because no one's notified us of any. And the date and the time of the next meeting is the 11th of June 2020. I think it's the Doncaster district, if I remember rightly, that will be providing us with the fourth report. Is there anything else that we've missed at all, Michelle, or are we?
No, I think everything's been covered, Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.